This interview is being brought to you by teststrips.com. That's teststrips with a Z.com. Managing diabetes is your business. Making it affordable is theirs. You can turn your extra unused diabetes supplies into cash. Up to $50 per box by visiting teststripswithaz.com. All right, welcome to the debut episode of the Laid-Back MMA Preview Show. My name is Mike Heck, and there's no better way to start this new tradition than to have my good friend James Lynch join me to preview UFC on ESPN +1. I'm just going to call it UFC Brooklyn for the sake of time. So, James, how are you, man?
I'm doing awesome. If I'd known this was going to be a laid-back show, I would have worn like an undershirt. I'm all dressed up here, but thank you very much for having me, Mike. It's always good talking MMA with you.
I know. Look at me. I look like Corey Matthews from Boy Meets World right now.
So much for laid back.
Corporate Mike here. How about that? Unbelievable. So I want to talk about a couple of the newcomers who are going to be fighting on this card. You and I both got to talk to Mario Bautista, who's going to be fighting Corey Sandhagen to open up the ESPN preliminary card. But you also got the chance to talk to Kyle Stewart. I know Kyle Stewart. I haven't had the chance to talk to him, but I know he's a guy that you've talked to for quite some time. He's been knocking on the door of a UFC opportunity, hasn't quite gotten there, and now he gets his opportunity. So I watched like the first probably 15 seconds of the Kyle Stewart interview that you did with him, and that's all I needed to see how excited he was. He was ready to go from the get-go. So talk about how exciting this is for Kyle and how excited you are as a guy who's interviewed him for so long to kind of see him take that step up.
Well, if you remember, Kyle actually tried to fight Carlos Condit when Condit, I think, was out without an opponent or something. This was a while back before. I think they ended up giving him Cowboy Oliveira. So Kyle's been on the cusp. But to be honest, I think the time between then and now has paid off for Kyle. One of the things we talked about in his interview was his first career loss, which happened last year against James Nakashima. And that actually forced Kyle to go back to the drawing board, so much so that he actually switched camps, and now he's at the MMA lab training with James Nakashima, which I think is very cool. So Kyle really fixing those things that happened in that matchup, because up to that point he was dominant. He had a big win before that over Jaleel Willis, who was an undefeated prospect, and Kyle took him out, and we thought that was going to be the time when he got the call. But he had the fight against Nakashima, and he had another fight in between there. So he's coming off a win in LFA, and now he's taking this on short notice, and I like his chances in this fight. The only concern I have, and he talked about it on the interview there, was that he's cutting a lot of weight. He says he's got to cut about 30 pounds, and that's when I talked to him on Monday. So let's hope there's no commission issues with that. Let's hope he actually makes the weight. I mean, Kyle's the guy. He'll do whatever it takes. He's a former Marine. He will get down to the weight. But the thing I like about Kyle is that he's just a grinder. He's a guy that will get in your face. You can't have any moment to take a deep breath, because Kyle will get in there and get dirty. So I like his chances against Chance Rencounter. Chance Rencounter, looking great as well. Training at Alliance. He gets a full camp this time instead of having that short notice opportunity like he had against Bilal Muhammad. But should be a great fight to kick off the historic tenure of the UFC on ESPN.
I want to get your thoughts on that, because I don't think you and I have really have addressed this now that it's so close, and now it's like pretty much here that it's fight week, UFC on ESPN, and I see both sides of it, because obviously this is huge for the sport. This is huge for the UFC. This is huge for mixed martial arts in general. It's getting that mainstream play. Dana White's wanted to be on ESPN for years and years and years. He pretty much guaranteed that one day we'll be on ESPN. But I've heard a lot of people, and I've had people reach out to me. I won't name names or anything, that are concerned from the media perspective that ESPN will begin to kind of monopolize coverage of MMA. But guys like you and guys like Nolan King, they're not slowing down because of this. But is that a concern of yours, being a media member? And have you heard these same concerns from other people yourself?
Yeah, I have heard the concerns, but I think at the end of the day, we faced the same problem with Fox when Fox had journalists on their payroll. I mean, it's one of those things where, yeah, it's a conflict of interest. Look, I used to work in the television world where, for Rogers, where they own the Blue Jays. So you have analysts trying to be objective, but the team that is owned, like the Major League Baseball team, is owned by the company that they work for. So, yeah, there's a bit of a conflict of interest there, but I think in general, you're just going to see more. One of the trends we're seeing, and I think we're going to see more of it, unfortunately, is where the UFC will announce a fight and say it's a done deal, and then, to put pressure on a specific fighter to sign the contract. We saw that with Nick Diaz and George Masvidal. That fight was supposed to happen on UFC 235. It is not happening because, Diaz didn't end up signing. So we're going to see stuff like that. But I think overall, for someone like myself, it's not going to impact my bottom line. I'm just going to keep doing my interviews and breaking news when I can. But you just got to keep trucking, as they say.
Absolutely. We also got in the welterweight division on the ESPN Plus prelims, Bilal Muhammad is back. Remember the name, taking on Jeff Neal. When this fight was announced, I was like, woo, this is a good one. So what are your thoughts on this fight and the return of Bilal Muhammad? Because he's one of those guys that I think he's on the cusp of greatness. He's right there. He's got the skill, and obviously he's flying pretty high after the Luis Taylor $1 million championship with the PFL. So he's feeling pretty good. Obviously, Luis Taylor's going to be in his corner, so hopefully that winning strategy can remain with him if you're Bilal Muhammad and his team. But what do you think of this matchup to kind of kick things off in the ESPN Plus era here?
If I had to pick one fight on the card that contend for fight of the night, it's this one right here. You look at some of the bigger names on this card, that's sort of what first comes to mind when you think of fight of the night. But these two guys love to slug it out. Jeff Neal has incredible knockout power. His last fight was a highlight reel finish over Frank Camacho. This guy continues to impress, and he's part of that Fortis MMA camp, which really put their name on the map this last year. Steven Peterson won, Macy Chiasson won the Ultimate Fighter. They've just had a lot of success from that gym, and I think that's going to rub off on Jeff here. He's a younger guy. Bilal has looked great. It just seems like anytime he gets a step up in competition, it doesn't go his way. You saw Vicente Luque, you saw Joe Bannon in his debut. Granted, that was short notice, but I think Jeff Neal is as advertised. The only issue I have with Neal is that he hasn't fought really tough competition, even in his last 3 fights. If you look on Contender Series, when he fought Chase Walden, he had that 11-2 record, but I think most people consider Jeff the favorite in that one. He beat Brian Camozzi, who's not in the UFC anymore, and then he beat Camacho, who really is a lightweight. But I'm curious. I think this fight could go either way. I am going to side with youth on this one as far as my pick goes, but don't be surprised if Bilal Muhammad as an underdog ends up pulling this one off. He has the experience. He also has knockout power, and he's a guy that's really tough to put away. Like I said, Luque, the only guy to put him away. So I can't wait for this one.
And he also has a win in Brooklyn himself. So he's fought at the Barclays Center before. He did it on short notice against Randy Brown. So he's looking to continue that streak at the Barclays Center. And then what was really interesting about this card is Dennis Bermudez jumping up to 155. He's going to be fighting T. Edwards. And T. Edwards, obviously a very explosive guy. We saw it on the Contender Series, that quick flash knockout. The whole signing of the check thing, it was hilarious, and he got his opportunity. Of course, his debut didn't go his way, and he's going to welcome Dennis Bermudez to 155. Were you surprised to see Bermudez make the jump to 55 like he is?
Not really, because he's on a 4-fight losing streak. So I think at this point, as you get older, it's not a bad idea to move up a weight class. Just ask Robert Whittaker. We see fighters have success when they don't have to cut those extra pounds. And to be honest, I like Dennis Bermudez in this fight, Mike. I really think he's being overlooked here. You look at the losing streak, 3 of those losses out of the 4 were split decision losses. So he was in those fights, and they were tough guys like Rick Glenn, Darren Elkins. I mean, those aren't bad losses in the featherweight division. And he's fighting T. Edwards, who, again, really disappointing debut. I spoke to him. I know you did as well. He went back to the drawing board. That was a really bad debut for him against Don Madge. Don Madge is a stud, but that wasn't the type of debut that Edwards wanted. I just look at the experience in this fight, Mike. Bermudez has, he's a 16-9 record. He's fought sort of the who's who in the featherweight division, and I think that experience is going to pay off here. And I think he probably will look better at lightweight than he did at featherweight because, again, as you get older, I know he's not super old, but he is 32, and in fight years, he's probably way older than that. So I definitely like Bermudez in this fight. But Edwards, he's got a chip on his shoulder. I'm sure he wants to redeem that loss. So expect a pretty close fight. But I think Bermudez will pull this one off as an underdog.
And then to kick off the ESPN cable TV era, we got the aforementioned Mario Batista taking on Corey Sandhagen. And I thought what was really interesting about this matchup is, and Mario even said it himself when I talked to him, this fight could have easily happened outside of the UFC. Could have happened in LFA. I know they both fought on the same card, both got finishes, and it seemed like things were lining up for them to fight in LFA, and now all of a sudden, Sandhagen gets the call up, Batista not far behind. What do you think of this matchup now that John Lineker's out of the fight?
Well, I definitely think this is a better fight for Corey Sandhagen. That was, give him props. A lot of guys in the bantamweight division do not want to fight John Lineker, and he put his hand up. And that's just the type of guy that we know he is. I mean, you just look at his UFC, or his second UFC fight, I should say, against Alcantara. he looked like he was down and out, and he came back and finished him, and that was one of the best comeback fights we've seen. I think what this comes down to is experience. Again, Batista's only got 6 fights. He's looked good on the regional scene, but when you make that leap, it's just a bigger deal. And I think what Sandhagen did in his last fight to show that he can overcome adversity, I think will pay off here. So I like Sandhagen by decision. I think he'll play it safe and get the win, but expect a pretty solid matchup here between these two bantamweights.
The light heavyweight division, we got Alonzo Menafield versus Vinicius Moreira Castro. Probably my favorite name on the card. And, of course, light heavyweight division is in need of stars big time. I mean, obviously, we've seen guys ascend through the division. We saw Anthony Smith, what a year he had. Now he's going to get ready to fight John Jones. But Alonzo Menafield is one of those guys that has a ton of potential, taking on a very tough guy in Vinicius Moreira Castro. What do you think of this fight?
Love this fight. Good matchmaking here because you're going to figure out who is the real prospect in this division. They're both relatively young. Menafield 31, Alves 29. And, I don't think this is an easy fight for anyone. I mean, Menafield's undefeated, but you could argue that, some of the competition there not as strong as some of the guys that Alves has fought. I mean, the guy he fought in Contender Series to get the UFC contract, the second time I should say, was Deshaun Boatwright, who only had 3 fights. I mean, there's a big experience gap there between 6 and 3 fights. So, Menafield's another Fortis MMA guy. Like I said, that gym has been on a roll. I think we'll see Menafield get the win here. I think there's just a little bit more upside with him. But Alves, again, he's being overlooked here, and I think that's a dangerous thing against, a guy who's undefeated. Might get a little overconfident, but Menafield's going to be my pick.
Women's flyweight action, I'm very much looking forward to. Joanne Calderwood versus Ariane Lipski. I mean, Joanne Calderwood, her goal is, with a great performance, next in line to fight for the title. How do you feel about this fight, and how do you feel about Joanne's chances, should she get a victory, getting the next shot at the belt?
Well, Lipski's a killer. We saw that in KSW. That's why the UFC brought her in, and I think this is the perfect test because, a lot of people are overlooking Calderwood in this fight. I just see people saying Lipski's going to destroy her, this and that, and I get it because Lipski's looked great, but let's not forget the success that Calderwood has had at flyweight. Her last fight, quick finish, looked like the old Calderwood. If you go back a couple years ago, the fight she had against Valerie Letourneau, which was a flyweight fight, the first UFC women's flyweight fight in history, she looked great. She got the finish there too. So I think that the issue with her over the career is just that she's been in the wrong weight class. I think 115 was a tougher cut on her. And even those losses at 115, Cynthia Calvillo, Jessica Andrade, those are her last 2 losses. Those aren't bad losses. I mean, Andrade is fighting for a title right now. So I think this is going to be a much closer fight than people think. I do like the fact that Calderwood has switched camps. She's in Vegas now training at Syndicate under John Wood. And the nice thing there is that she gets female training partners. So I know Sarah Kaufman was there. There's Roxanne Modafferi. So she's getting a lot of different looks there. But I like Lipski in this fight. I think she wins the decision. And I think she looks great. As I'm dying here. I got a bit of a cold.
Laid-Back MMA Preview Show. There you go. I hear you as well.
Donald Cerrone versus Alex Hernandez. This is that fight that as soon as it was booked, I was like, oh my goodness, this is a perfect kind of matchmaking fight here because Cerrone going back down to lightweight, obviously the established wily veteran taking on the up-and-comer in Alex Hernandez. And from the first time I talked to Alex Hernandez, obviously his fight style is fantastic. He's very well-rounded. He's only going to get better and better. And just the way his personality rolls and just kind of, just the way he is. He's got superstar written all over him. So it's really great matchmaking by the UFC because obviously if Cerrone comes back and gets a win in the lightweight division, that's great. But if Hernandez can go in there and do what he plans on doing to Cerrone, this is huge. You get another star at 155. How excited are you for this fight to headline the ESPN TV prelims?
What an opportunity here for Alex Hernandez. You and I talked to Alex when he made his debut. This guy has got the personality, and he backs it up in the cage. I mean, that was a great debut win over Dariush, and then he follows that up with a pretty impressive win in Canada against Olivier Aubin-Mercier. To me, this is Cerrone. All the pressure's on him in this fight. He's getting up there in age. He's moving down a weight class, which I don't get. He's coming off a win at welterweight. He's going back down again. That cut could be tough on him. That will certainly be an impact against him, just cutting that extra weight. And Hernandez, I mean, really, all he has to do is just avoid the ground, and I think this is his to win. I mean, his striking's on point. He's got the knockout power. And the fact that this is headlining the ESPN prelims, which will be on ESPN, not ESPN Plus, I think is a great opportunity to build a star here. So you hope that Hernandez goes out there and gets the job done because this is exactly, like you said, good matchmaking because you can make Hernandez a star if he gets a finish here against Cerrone. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think Hernandez is going to win the fight. Now the question is, does he finish it or does he go the distance? I'm going to go finish. I think he's going to find his striking early on. I think he's going to avoid any sort of onslaught that Cerrone has, and I think he gets a finish in the 3rd round. I think it'll take a little bit, but he'll get it done, and I think the hype is real on this kid, so I'm going Alex Hernandez.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. What a story that would be if you can go in there and get a win on such a big stage like that. As we head to the ESPN Plus main card in Brooklyn, light heavyweights kick things off. Glover Teixeira versus Carl Robertson. Of course, Cutelaba out of the fight with an injury. Stepping in, Carl Robertson. Big opportunity for Carl Robertson here. I like this fight in Brooklyn. What do you think?
I love this fight too. Robertson moving up a weight class to the light heavyweight division on short notice, and he's also a teammate of Corey Anderson, who's the last fighter to defeat Glover Teixeira. So probably some good insight there. But I like Glover in this fight. I see a lot of people saying, Robertson's a prospect, he's younger and all this stuff. But like I said, moving up a weight class, and he just doesn't have the experience. I mean, look at this, 27-7 record for Teixeira, and the guys he's fought, John Jones, Gustafsson, everyone, compared to Robertson, who's only got 8 fights. Now, saying that, Glover's 39 years old. He's taken a lot of damage in the last couple of fights especially, but I think he'll do just enough to get the win here. And I think, if he does get this to the ground, we saw Robertson, his ground game, a little bit suspect. Cesar Ferreira made short work of him when they fought. So I'm going with Glover here. I know he's the favorite, but I do feel like people are overlooking him here, but I think Glover gets it done.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think we're going to see the same kind of fight we saw at UFC 208 in Brooklyn. He's just I think it was Jared Cannonier that he fought. He just took him down and beat him up a little bit and just grinded out a decision. I would not be surprised to see the same thing happen in this fight, but a big opportunity for Carl Robertson nonetheless. As we head to Paige Van Zandt versus Rachel Ostovich. Of course, when this fight was announced, and of course we'll talk about the co-main event in a minute, there's a lot of chatter, a lot of people talking about it. Of course, Dana White was like, Rachel Ostovich said, I wanted to be on this card regardless of Greg Hardy being there, but she seems very positive about this. She's all about Greg Hardy turning his life around and getting a second chance. Of course, she's gone through a lot of horrible things herself, so this is an interesting piece of matchmaking right here. Obviously, you got 2 up-and-coming young flyweights. Obviously, Van Zandt has a little more experience here in the UFC, in the octagon, so this is an exciting fight, an exciting stage for both of these ladies. What do you think of this fight outside of all the kind of drama on the outside of the octagon?
Well, I mean, let's call it what it is. This fight really shouldn't be on the main card. There's a couple reasons why they're on there. Don't need to get into those, but because like a 7-4 and a 4-4 fighter, that just doesn't ever happen on a main card. But we have this fight. I'm a little bit intrigued by it for 2 reasons. Number one, Van Zandt's had a long layoff. She's coming off a broken arm. She's coming off a loss as well. So, I mean, that's a couple strikes against her. And with Ostovich, I mean, there's something about overcoming personal adversity and being able to thrive in moments like this. I'm going to take an older example. I believe Brett Favre, his dad passed away, and then he had one of the best games of his career. Like, you see moments like this in sports where something terrible happens and you're able to overcome and perform at your best. So there is that aspect with Rachel Ostovich. But with that said, if I'm looking at this fight on paper, if I have to put money on it, I got to go Paige Van Zandt. She's got a good ground game. She's fought way better competition. Granted, when she's had that step up, she tends to not do so well. You just look at the Rose Namajunas fight, for example. But she's got that ground game, and Ostovich is susceptible on the ground. That's how she lost her last fight. Montana De La Rosa was able to submit her. I think we're going to see another submission win here by Paige Van Zandt, who gets the job done. But again, what can you say about Rachel Ostovich overcoming adversity and even taking this fight? Good on her.
Absolutely. Speaking of flyweights, we got Joseph Benavidez versus Dustin Ortiz, and this is interesting because obviously this card is headlined by Henry Cejudo defending the flyweight title. All this chatter about the flyweight division going bye-bye in the near future, and all of a sudden on the main card, 2 out of the last 4 fights on this main card are in the flyweight division. So in a way, before we get to the fight itself, do you think that this might be some sort of almost like a tryout for the flyweights, like a chance to say, like, listen, we're giving you this stage, we're giving you this opportunity. If you guys go out there, perform, make some things happen, maybe we'll extend your life a little bit more? Or do you think it's just kind of, we're filling up the card here, the division is going to go bye-bye eventually, we're just going to fill some roster spots, essentially, fill some card spots?
Well, I think that the Ortiz and Benavidez matchup was made just as a backup. My theory with the flyweight division is it is on its last legs. I think if Cejudo, we'll talk about the main event later, but I think if Cejudo wins, then you keep the title, but you just have a few flyweights on the roster, and they just shuffle them into title fights here and there. But if Dillashaw wins, then yeah, that could be very well the end of the flyweight division. But I don't get the sense, just with the fact of how many people they've released and fighters that I think had a lot of potential, like Jared Brooks, like Jose Shorty Torres. I think that just shows that they're not really interested in keeping things around. So this to me is just a filler fight. It's a great fight. The problem is, though, I don't think this is going to be incredibly exciting. If you remember the first fight, it had its moments. Ortiz looked good early on, and then, of course, he faded as the fight went. But, you hope for a finish, but I don't know. I have a feeling we could see a 29-28, 30-27 decision here for Joseph Benavidez, and it just being like, oh, yeah, we know he's a top guy, but, Not much interest, unfortunately.
Over the last several months, there has been a lot of fighters people have been asking me about, but I think maybe at the top of that list, or in like probably the top 3, Gregor Gillespie. When's Gregor Gillespie coming back? And now he gets a very exciting matchup with Yancy Medeiros. Of course, Yancy Medeiros has that power, very exciting fighter, and Gregor Gillespie is just a savage, just a smothering pace. His ground game is unbelievable. This is another opportunity. I mean, Yancy Medeiros has an established veteran-like name. Gregor Gillespie is one of those guys coming up in this division, so this is another good piece of matchmaking. What do you see in this fight?
So I see a lot of people saying that Gregor Gillespie is going to just walk right through Yancy Medeiros, and I get it. From a stylistic perspective, this is not a good matchup for Yancy Medeiros. He struggles against really good wrestlers. Gillespie undefeated for a reason, but I want to pose a couple interesting tidbits to your listeners here, and that is a couple things. First off, Medeiros looked good at welterweight. I think the reason he's dropping down is because he just feels like he can make the weight and that it's not too taxing on his body. When I interviewed him 2 weeks ago, he said he was 164. That's less than 10 pounds off. He's on a plant-based diet now. It looks like that's working out for him. So he could find more success in that division. And just look at the guys that he's fought. Cerrone, I know that was a loss, but again, he's slugging it out with him. He has the win over Alex Oliveira at welterweight, which looks great. He's fought Dustin Poirier. He's just fought tougher guys than Gillespie has. Gillespie's been on a great roll, but if you look at Vince Pichel, Jordan Rinaldi, Jason Gonzalez, those aren't really household names. Those aren't really notable opponents. So I think this could be a case where people are overvaluing Gregor. And I was looking at the line today, and I think right now Gregor, looking at the line here, Gregor's minus 550. I don't think it's that clear cut. I think it's going to be much closer. And I'll tell you a prop if your listeners are interested. There's a knockout prop by Medeiros is like plus 600. This guy has knockout power. It's possible we could see him get the finish, but with all that said, more than likely Gillespie wins the decision here, but don't count out Yancy Medeiros.
Nah, he's super tough, and the Cerrone fight, it was interesting because it just seemed like they were too friendly, and it seemed like his eyes were off the prize. You're just like, hey, buddy, let's throw some punches and see what happens. But yeah, don't sleep on Yancy Medeiros at all, dude, because he's just one of those guys that if he can kind of dictate where this fight goes, if he can turn it into a brawl, he's got a really good chance in this fight. But obviously, Gregor Gillespie, a very intelligent fighter, so I'm looking forward to that one. And then we got to address the elephant in the room. We got Greg Hardy versus Alan Crowder, heavyweights in the co-main event. Obviously, we don't need to talk about why this is the co-main event. It's just kind of silly and a little short-sighted by the UFC, but it is what it is. It's here. There's no reason to really dwell on it. But do you think, if there are odds on this, is Alan Crowder, like minus 10,000, going to be the odds-on crowd favorite in Brooklyn, New York on Saturday night?
Oh, of course. I interviewed Crowder, and he says he gets messages all the time being like, go knock this guy out, everything like that. I get it, but, I think there's a reason the UFC put this matchup together. This is what no one's talking about. Like, they're not going to put Greg Hardy on TV and give him a hard matchup. And if they are, they didn't pick the right opponent to do it, because nothing against Alan Crowder, but I just think, this is the perfect matchup for Hardy. He's a fast guy. He's got knockout power. I know he's only got 3 fights, but that athletic background that he had in the NFL has certainly translated well into the cage. He's just looked unstoppable in his last couple fights, and I know he doesn't have the experience that Crowder does, but he just moves like a light heavyweight at heavyweight. It's crazy just how fast this guy is. Clearly, the pressure's on Hardy, but, he hasn't really been doing any interviews. He's kind of got to avoid a lot of those questions. And let's be honest here, this is the first ESPN Plus card. They want to get subscribers in there. If you say that Greg Hardy was on there will be people, even if they hate him, that want to tune in and watch him just because of the fact he played for, the Panthers and the Cowboys. I mean, this is a guy that, has notoriety, so that's why he's in the spot he's in. And let's take all that stuff outside the cage out of the equation for the moment. Greg Hardy is an exciting prospect. I mean, he is. I was very impressed with him on Contender Series, and then the fight after that he followed it up with. So I expect a good fight here. Now, does Crowder have a shot? Absolutely. This is heavyweight MMA. How many times have we seen upsets where it just takes one punch to land? So, but with that said, I was at Alan Crowder's last fight, which was December 2017. And he got knocked out by Justin Willis in the first round. Justin Willis does not knock people out too often. If you look at his last 2 fights, they went the distance, especially against Chase Sherman. That's a fight where you thought a finish would happen, but it didn't. So that loss looking even worse now for Alan Crowder. But my pick's Greg Hardy here. I think, take everything out of the equation. He's a good heavyweight.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I'm kind of intrigued about where Greg Hardy's personality goes with all this. Like, I know he wants to be the comeback story. I know he wants to be like, listen, time will heal all things. I'm trying to turn things around. But, what if he comes out just full-fledged heel? Like, obviously, just being like, listen, leave me alone. I'm trying to do the best I can. Just have a little bit of an edge to him. Does that kind of enhance him a little bit as far as drawing power goes? Or does he play the, listen, that stuff's behind me, and try to be nice and try to be that, I don't really know. Kind of like what John Jones tried to do heading into the DC fight in a way, like just trying to be like the turnaround guy, and then at moments John Jones can go full heel and everyone seems to be a little more fascinated by him. Does Greg Hardy kind of follow that same blueprint here, or does he just really try to get kind of those sympathetic points that, listen, people go through things, people make mistakes, now it's my turn, I'm using martial arts to turn my life around and try to turn this into a positive? Like, what approach do you think he takes here?
Well, it's funny you mentioned John Jones because they have the same management group. They're both first-round fighters. So obviously they've been through this before with John Jones. So I'm sure they're telling him to just keep a low profile, like, hey, move it along. Like, I don't think he's embraced the heel aspect, because I think you would have seen that in interviews that he did or whatever, or anything. Like, he could have said, like, screw you guys, I'm a great heavyweight, whatever. Like, he could have gone that route, but he hasn't. And I think he knows, and I think there is some guilt and some, I think he knows, like to a certain degree that what he did was, was terrible, and that, I don't think he's been fully remorseful. I mean, that's a podcast in itself, but no, I think he will. I think he'll just keep a low profile. I think he'll just do his, let his fists do the talking, so to speak.
Moving on to the main event, Henry Cejudo versus TJ Dillashaw. It's happening. TJ Dillashaw has a chance to be a two-weight champion here. Obviously, Henry Cejudo pulling off maybe the upset of the year last year against Demetrius Johnson. He's the flyweight champion. And now he gets TJ Dillashaw. And of course, the big story is, can TJ make the weight? We've seen all the photos pop up on social media with TJ just looking absolutely shredded. He's telling people he weighs 138. Then he goes out 2 days later and tells Luke Thomas, the weight cut's pretty much all done. It's just got a couple pounds to go. So what do you believe from the photos you've seen, maybe some of the interviews that you've read or heard? Are you concerned about TJ Dillashaw making 125 right now?
I'm not, because if you look at a lot of the people, and even myself, I mean, I'm not an expert with this stuff. I mean, we've seen bad weight cuts and fighters go. I mean, look at the statistics of fighters who've missed weight and still had great performances. TJ's not going to miss weight. I've been following a little bit on Instagram with him. I know he's got everything calculated through a computer and all this stuff, so he knows what he's doing. And he's a guy who's never missed weight, so I don't see an issue with him making it. I mean, that is the big question here. But it's funny how everyone's talking about TJ making weight. Like, Cejudo's missed weight before too. It's been a couple years, but I don't think we should completely say this is all in Dillashaw. But the big question in this fight is, if Dillashaw can look anywhere close to what he did at bantamweight, then I think you have to favor him in this fight. People talk about Cejudo beating Demetrius Johnson. One thing people don't talk about that Johnson fight is that I think Johnson might have overlooked Cejudo a bit. He already had the win over him before. He got a quick victory. I mean, there's a certain it would be hard pressed to find someone who doesn't overlook an opponent when they beat him devastatingly the first time. And Demetrius is, he defended his title for a while. We know now he's in one. Maybe he took his pedal off the gas, so to speak. So I don't look at that win as big of a deal as others do. But, if this fight stays standing, I think you have to give it to Dillashaw. Just his striking. People don't talk enough about his technical striking and how good it is. He's been hit before, but I like Dillashaw here. I think the big question is the scale. I think he'll make it, and I think from there he'll just he'll do what he does. But this is such a good fight. Like, you're really seeing two guys in the prime of their career, and I'm excited for it.
And Cejudo looks great, and it's funny. I'm seeing the promotional push behind Henry Cejudo just for this fight. I've never seen even half of this promotion for Demetrius Johnson. I mean, obviously you got to promote yourself. It's MMA. You got to make yourself a star in a lot of different ways. But when have you seen Demetrius Johnson get the kind of push and the kind of publicity that Henry Cejudo's getting right now? Do you think it's just because of the ESPN deal, or do you think the UFC is just kind of moving on? You see the UFC on social media, they're posting that Cejudo versus Demetrius Johnson fight pretty much over and over again, just to remind us that this guy beat Demetrius, almost ran him out of the company, so to speak. So are you surprised by this, or do you I don't really, especially with the division that everyone's talking about is going to be fluttering away, they seem to be putting a lot of push behind Henry Cejudo right now.
Well, I think it's a combination of things. Like you said, the new ESPN era, so they want to really, promote this well. I think part of it, too, is that early on in DJ's career when he was the champion, he was fighting to a decision. So it's not like you had a lot of highlights to work from. It was only recently where he started getting really impressive finishes like the one he got on Cejudo and, Wilson Hayes and other fighters. So, I mean, you're seeing that. So I think that's part of it, too, where, Cejudo does have a bit more of a highlight reel in that regard. But, I think it's one of the, I think a lot of these fighters are on their own when it comes to promoting themselves or to promote what they're doing, and you can't rely on the UFC. So, because I mean, DJ, the argument on the other side is how many cards did DJ headline, and it just didn't translate to the fans. It's just one of those things. So, I don't have an issue with it. I think that again, it's a combination of things, not just one particular area.
Will this be the final flyweight title fight in UFC history?
Yes, I think it will be, because I think TJ Dillashaw is going to win, and TJ has no intention of staying at 125. I don't blame him. He just wanted to make history. I think this could be it for everything. Just again, if they would have hung on to a few more flyweights or whatever, I might have thought otherwise, but it just seems like the fact that they even did this fight, I think, shows that they just want to, they call him Killashaw for a reason, right? He's going to kill off the division.
Yeah, I like TJ Dillashaw a lot. I think... Where do you rank him in the pound-for-pound conversation right now? Because I think he's creeping up there, and almost quietly creeping up there, despite having these great performances. Those 2 awesome victories over Cody Garbrandt. It looked phenomenal. Even Cody was on Ariel's show the other day saying, like, man, did I overlook him? He's one of those guys. He's a complete mixed martial artist. He's all in on the sport. He's super impressed by TJ. Where do you rank him on the pound-for-pound list right now?
He's got to be in my top 5, and I know that's a little crazy to say, but if you look at his record, I mean, people don't factor this in. The Cruz fight, I thought he won. Okay, so you take that out of the equation. That's a crazy winning streak there. The other fight he lost, I also thought he won against Rafael Assunção the first time they fought. So realistically, the only loss he's had that you could look at and say, okay, clear cut he lost, was the Dodson fight, and that was back in 2011. I mean, that's 8 years ago. It's crazy. So to me, this guy's just unreal. Especially what he was able to do to Barao twice. I mean, Barao has not been the same fighter since then. Let's not forget about the Lineker win as well. Like, he has quality victories here, at bantamweight, and I think that can't be overlooked. And the fact that he was able to knock out Garbrandt twice, just very impressive when Garbrandt had been undefeated up till that point. He's up there for sure. I don't think he gets enough credit for that, because I think people still associate him as this snake for leaving Alpha Male. But guess what? He was smart in the end, because look at that team now. They basically all, like the original fighters, a lot of the guys have left. Benavidez is gone. Lance Palmer. A lot of these guys have left. So TJ, I think he probably saw something, and he was like, you know what? I got to do what's best for me. And again, this is an individual sport.
It's a great card. It's a great way to kick off the ESPN era, and it all takes place this Saturday in Brooklyn, New York. And for those traveling to Brooklyn, you better leave early, because you're going to get crushed with snow. I know I can't even go home to the beautiful Berkshires to see my family this weekend, because they're calling for 2 feet of snow this weekend. But I'm here in Cape Cod. We're just going to get rain here, maybe an inch of snow. So much better situation for me. What's the weather looking like on Saturday up in the Great White North? Oh, you're on the West Coast now. I forgot you moved to Vancouver.
I am, yeah. So. Actually, the weather's not too bad. I mean, it was a little cold this morning. Ricky Simone and I were kind of joking about it, because we're both on the Pacific Northwest, and it was a little cold. But little cold here is like, I got a little bit of frost on my car. I'd have to get off the top. But, I'm still wearing sweaters this time of year, which is great. And if I was back in Toronto, I'd be full-fledged toque, I know you guys call beanies over there in the States, and a scarf and all that. So luckily I don't have to, I don't really need winter clothes here. It's great.
There you go. As we put a bow on the first Laid-Back MMA Preview Show, we're going to be doing a bunch of these. James, I hope you can come along for the ride, man, because obviously there's a million cards that are going to be coming up. It's the UFC and the ESPN era, so you know what that means. We were hoping for less cards and maybe less pay-per-views, but we're going to get as many, if not more, cards this year. So we're going to have a lot of chances to go back and forth here. But before we get out of here, of course, everyone already knows where to find and follow you, but for those who have seen your face for the first time here tonight, let them know where to find and follow you, where to find your interviews. I'm sure there's a million platforms to find you, because you're everywhere, my friend.
Well, I appreciate that. Anytime you want me on the show, I love doing it. Always enjoy it. I miss between the links, but this is just as cool too. At least we get to do a video component, which is awesome. You can follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at LynchOnSports. You can also check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/LynchOnSports, and you can find my work up at here. I won't take too long. Fightful, Sherdog, Flow Combat, BJPenn.com, The Turp House, MMA Oddsbreaker, My MMA News, and MMA Saka. Mike, it was a pleasure, man. Really looking forward to the card this weekend, and can't wait to talk to some fights with you again soon.
All right, absolutely. Thank you, James, and thanks everybody for taking part and following along here with the first Laid-Back MMA Preview Show. Hope you enjoyed the goofy intro video that I put together. It's absolutely ridiculous, but that's how we're going to start off all these shows moving forward. So make sure you follow me on my YouTube page, Mike Heck MMA. Follow me on Twitter, MikeHeck_JR. Enjoy the fights this weekend. Got more interviews coming up this week, so make sure you subscribe to the page and check them all out. James, thanks again, my friend.
My pleasure, man. Thank you for having me.